dialed this up. We just kind of hit a couple switches over the county, and here we are. So all that to say, we're glad you made it this afternoon. My name is Dean McClary. I work for Pierce County. I provide agricultural support in a couple different ways, specifically on the ag drainage side. And give Renee and Allie a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll tell you about the program.
Okay, and I'm Renee Skaggs. I'm the Farm Program Director at the Pierce Conservation District. So if you're not familiar with conservation districts, we were established after the Dust Bowl to prevent man-made agricultural natural disasters from occurring again. So there's pretty much a district in every county in the U.S., and we focus our programming based on what the natural resource concerns are in our area. So most of our stuff is all about water quality and, protecting it, improving it. So our program, we're in our minds, we're thinking about the water quality, but we're also hopefully giving you co-benefits of having more grass for your livestock, less mud, and, having a more profitable farming operation. So we are non-regulatory. We're here to give you information, and we will tell you what the rules are in case you don't know what they are, but if you decide not to follow them, we'll just bite our tongues and plant the seed and hopefully bring you around to following the rules. But if you don't, and this is, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Allison Nichols, and I'm on the farm team. I focus mainly on crop producers as opposed to the livestock producers, and just have been involved in this project with Drainage District 10 to put the skinny buffers, as we're calling them, on this section of Nancy's ditch.
Right.
Good. What we're going to do is we'll take care of the peas and the carrots first, talk a little bit about the regulatory side. Once again, not enforcement, so I want you to feel very comfortable in that. So what you have is a handout that includes materials from Pierce County. What you have on the front specifically is an overview of ways to consider how to go about the process of taking care of an agricultural ditch properly within the regulatory guidelines that we have in Pierce County. Let's go ahead and we have another member of our team here. So Miles, you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll go. Glad you made it.
Yeah, sorry I'm late.
No worries.
Hey everyone, Miles Pink. I work for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm a habitat biologist. I have a coverage area, and the Puyallup White River Drainage is my coverage area. So, good to be here.
Good. So what we're going to do is we'll take care of kind of the maybe the less fun part of the conversation. So I'll do that first, and I'll hand off to Miles, and then we've already talked about ways our sharing can enrich your understanding of how to work with agricultural ditches, and then Renee and Allison will talk more about ways that we can improve agricultural ditches in terms of their benefits. So besides just moving water, there are ways that we can do that, as well as go ahead and get some other benefits for wildlife and water quality. So that will be kind of our plan. And there'll be, go ahead, please.
Sorry. Please jump in if you have questions.
Absolutely.
As we're going along.
For sure. So I'm going to, the packet set up basically the way that we'll go through our time together. And again, we will be moving in a couple of minutes, and we will have snacks. So if you're feeling like the early dinner growls are coming on, you can grab something, grab a drink. And we will have a chance to actually see an example of a way that you can consider improving agricultural ditch in terms of not just moving water, but for other benefits as well. So on the sheet, just a quick reminder, we also want to make sure you understand what an agricultural ditch is. And that sounds pretty basic, but I do work on the regulatory side. We just want to make sure that you understand that it's not what we call a modified water system, and it's not a natural water system. It really is an artificial system created by us. Most of them, as you know, are probably historical. And one of the ways to know whether or not it is a ag ditch is that they won't have what we call headwaters. There's not going to be a spring or a wetland complex or a combination of both of those feeding that system. Agricultural ditches, of course, were designed by us as a way to try to improve the quality of the land for, as we call, working lands, right? So for farms and ranches, in some cases for forestry. There are one of two ways that we deal with seasonal water. Their job is move the water away, but we also have historical ways and even more modern ways to basically infiltrate the water. You take the excess water and you get it down into groundwater. So on the first page, besides the basic introduction, just to remind ourselves, why basically you guys here, right? What's the benefit of a good ag ditch? Well, there's a lot of things. One is a good agricultural ditch will allow you to get on your land earlier. You can stay on your land later. That whether you are working with crops or whether you're working with animals, you just improve the productivity of your land. When you're not having water moving across your parcels, your land, you're also preserving your soil, right? You're not moving material from the land into the ditch and changing water quality. And then what we'll talk a little bit about the second half of this presentation through what PCD has done here with this case study is that there's ways just to also improve other ways that the ditch goes about its business, which we call other benefits. So an ag ditch can provide habitat and water quality things that are also of a benefit to not only you, but also for our communities. You guys maybe are here because you go, I've got problems with my ditches. Well, let's quickly review those before we jump in. And you probably know what they are, right? So we can just have that flood, right? And thankfully we haven't had one of those for a while, but those emergency situations do occur. The cool thing is we can't necessarily predict them, but we can prepare for them. And that's maybe one of the reasons you're here. You want to improve or restore an agricultural ditch for those times when things just get out of control. A lot of you probably are thinking about your ditch in terms of what's just happened over time. They just naturally accumulate sediment and they'll build up some biomass. I was talking to a couple of folks here about canary grass, and that we know that's an issue. Then blockages, and some of those are human, some of those are natural. So the human type are you just have a culvert that fails, or you might have a bridge that maybe not your fault, but maybe wasn't properly installed and it's not quite adjusted quite right to handle those waters moving through that ditch at certain times of the year. And natural can just be the tree that falls across the ditch. We just dealt with that down here in DD 10 recently during the off season. There was a tree that went down across Clear Creek, and it was obviously blockage, right? And the one we don't like to talk about, but it's real, and Miles will talk about as well, is we have natural blockage because of beavers. And there's what we'll talk about what that means in terms of how to work with beavers in your system. All right, hey, take your that first part of your handout, turn it over, and we'll go through just a couple of statements, and then I'm going to hand off to Miles here. So on the back of that first page, I'm going to suggest to you that from a county perspective, there's really just 5 things we'd like to have you think about as you work with your ditches. One of the nice things for you to understand is that some of you might say, and maybe you already know this, maybe you don't, but we still have 7 active drainage districts. And we have a couple of representatives here as commissioners. Frankly, if you are in their system and you're having problems on your land with water on a seasonal basis, visit with your commissioners, right? So in other words, that's part of the reason that they exist, and some of these have been in place for a long, long time, and they can be a resource. They might be able to be in a position to take care of the problem for you. So number one, yes, sir.
Sorry, I missed the introduction. My name's Jason Pearsall.
Oh yeah,
I'm here
Jason.
with Drainage District 23. So
There you go.
I don't know that we'll have anybody, but if
Hey, there you go.
my district, you're right.
There you go, Jason. Thank you. I know it's been a while. We got 13. We have 14. Yeah. And we are hanging out in parts of 10 or DD 10. So anyway, the second thing we want you just to be aware of, just as before you go and pull the equipment out, whether you're going to spray or hand do this or you're going to do some dredging, is just confirm you got an ag ditch, right? So we're not as clear in Pierce County as some jurisdictions are in terms of water courses. So you know what an ag ditch is. Some jurisdictions are very, very good about clarifying that versus like what we call a natural water course versus a modified. But I'm going to use that language because it does make sense, right? So a natural water course is what you might see on your local map or your Google map search is a creek or a stream. And those are highly regulated water systems. They're not for us to be making decisions about. They are what we call the waters of the state. Modified water courses, that's the can of worms, right? So the reality is that we live in a county like many, and it's no one's fault. It's just the reality that a lot of our agricultural areas had traditional creeks and streams that were highly modified. They were ditched, they were dredged, they were moved to make that land more productive. It is what it is, right? But those modified water systems, and those water systems that have been modified can be worked with. All we just ask you, if you leave with hopefully just one thing is, again, regulatory, not enforcement, is if you say, I think I've got a modified water course and I got an ag ditch, what can I do? We will help you answer that question. It really is kind of a case-by-case basis. And we're not gonna turn anybody in. We want a conversation. We want to help you make the best decisions to meet the regulatory restraints we have in Pierce County. Third question, we're almost done, is part of what we'd like you to do is just think about where, again, this is you being a good citizen, frankly, is where does your water go? Okay, so whether it's an egg ditch or it's a modified water course or if it's a natural system, of course, you don't worry about that one. But an egg ditch, if it's draining into a natural water course, that's going to probably modify what you can and cannot do. Now, it doesn't mean you can't work there, but we have to think about water quality and we have to think about fish. The other question that comes up is, when can I get out and do it, right? So the days are warmer and the days are longer. I guess I just can go out and pull out my equipment and just go. Well, yes and no, okay? So one of the things we do want you to think about, even for an egg ditch, is that especially if it drains into a modified or natural water course, is that we may ask you, and Miles will talk about what's called the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife fish windows. They're just designed to say, believe it or not, some of our egg ditches have fish in them at certain times of the year. And we just want you to work there at a time where you minimize contact with fish and you minimize the amount of water that's in the system. It's not a big deal. We give you a big window in most cases to work within that area. And then last but not least, let's talk about, you say, I'm ready to go. I got my fish window. I know it's an egg ditch. Right in the bottom of the back page, I'm going to share one example. This is a case study, okay? Because it's nuanced, okay? So here's what I want you to tell you. Will give you an idea of how this might work. What can I do, okay? If you've got a true egg ditch and it's an agricultural ditch, you have to work within a fish window. Miles has worked with you on that. I can work with that as well. I know what the fish windows are, okay? It's got water in it, okay? And there might even be a potential at certain times of the year that you, in fact, got fish there, okay? What do you do first? Recommendation is, especially if it's going into a natural system, is just put in a temporary silt fence, okay? The purpose of that is just to go ahead and recognize that the work within that, below the ordinary water line, doing some dredging is going to disturb things. It's okay, you're allowed to do that. But what we want to do is minimize the movement of that materials into a natural water course where you maybe will affect fish, okay? You put it in place, you do your work. When you're done, we want that silt fence out of that area within about 2 days. Okay, turn the page. We're almost on the home stretch here, okay? This is pretty practical, is if you're working with equipment and you are doing some dredging and you're allowed to do that in a historical egg ditch, just make sure your equipment's in good shape. We just don't want you to have something that's leaking all over the place, whether that's hydraulic fluid or oil. That's self-explanatory, but we think that's an appropriate way for you to manage your ditch. The encouragement is to, your ditches, of course, move water. That means it starts here and it goes there. Follow the water course, okay? What that tends to do as we move from upstream to downstream, to use the language of streams and creeks, is that natural system will collect some of that sediment that's disturbed as you work your way down, and less of it's going to get down farther in the system. We encourage you to work as much as you can away from the natural vegetation that may be there. Even if it's reed canary grass, you might have some natural vegetation there. Try not to disturb that bank too much. Okay, a couple of do's and don'ts, and I'm done, and I'll take questions. Do's. The basic idea is just minimize disturbance on the bank as you work your way across. That's pretty self-explanatory. The big one that I was told, and I was, in fact, I almost had people at the county grabbing my arm and twisting. It's like, tell them that those dredge spoils can't be left there. And the reason for that, you say, what does that mean? You can't leave them next to the ditch, okay? I know you go, but it's expensive. You got to find a place to put it, right? Here's the reason why. We have a system in which most of our egg ditches are found in regulated floodways. And so the requirements of the feds, the states, down to the local is we need to move those materials out of that floodway if in fact there was a flood. So we do ask you to move those out of the way, move them to a safe place, use them in a way that's appropriate outside the floodway. But that I need to emphasize that. Last thing I'll comment on is woody material, even in a large woody material, not the stuff we see like in DB 14s. We're not talking about the sticks, but you got large woody material that's built into the bank. You even have a tree that falls across, and yes, it's a blockage, but there's a way to leave some of that woody material, especially if in fact it is where you have a system that has fish at times. There's a benefit to that, okay? Stabilizes the bank. There's some habitat things that are in place that are good for that. Cut the piece out that's blocking the channel. We're not saying leave the channel blocked, okay? But some of that old historical woody debris, large woody debris in those old egg ditches has benefit. And last thing I'll mention, I'll take questions, and I'll actually have Miles step in, is if you happen to find that you've done everything right and guess what? You do a bucket and you see a fish. Well, that's okay, but stop. Don't keep going. We're just going to ask you to give your local WDFW biologist a call and to say, hey, I'm working on a ditch, I'm doing everything right, I'm in the fish window, and I've got fish there. What should I do? And Miles will tell you what to do. It's not a big deal. Doesn't mean that you're in trouble. Doesn't mean you can't eventually, follow through and get it done. But we do want to respect the fact that that ditch does have multiple benefits. You're getting water off your land, but we're also taking care of the fish as well. So I've got the numbers for Miles there. So as well as others, because you represent other water sheds and basins here in Pierce County. So before I hand off to Miles, any questions? Again, just a quick. Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
If you're taking the dredge materials out of the ditch,
Yeah.
putting them on the side, and there's a flood.
Yeah.
What's the difference with it being on the side, or flood would probably take it out of the ditch too, or add more movement around?
Yeah, we're asking to actually get out of the floodplain, and I can actually help you with that. So in other words, so for your district, I could actually look at what's called the regulated floodplain.
I don't have it, but
Yeah.
I'm just
Right.
trying to understand the purpose.
Well, the purpose is, that's a great question. Okay, so when you leave dredge spoils in a floodplain, what happens is, and you got a flood, is all those materials now are re-liquefied and they're going to be distributed, and the concern is that could be a problem for those that live in that area. So the thought is get them out of the floodplain, so they're not something that's going to get moved around in a flood.
Because it's silt different than the native soil that's above it on the bank, or I'm trying to.
Sure. Good question.
So,
Right.
I mean,
It's very fine material, isn't it?
It's very fine silt, and that's what you're trying to keep out. It's different than the soil on top
exactly.
that we're farming, for instance.
Jason, exactly.
Okay.
Very well said.
Okay.
That's the
So
concern.
it's really the silt. It floats so easily and moves so easily, and then deposits. You only see it right in front of our culverts built up. It's
Yep.
all silt.
Right, it just gets
So,
redistributed in places you
goes
don't
away.
want it. When you don't, where if we take it off the floodplain, Amy, we don't even have to. It's done properly. If there's a flood, we don't have to worry about where it's going to end up.
I would have assumed a lot of that got tilled back in with the majority, but I guess
Yeah,
that's an elevation
I
issue you'd
understand,
have
and
to think
there's not a time clause on that requirement. Yeah, I
Yeah.
wish I could say, well,
That's
yes,
more of an elevation thing than a.
Right,
Yeah.
elevation.
yes,
I
exactly.
remember the floods going through Centralia to Halos back when,
Right.
and it's going down the streets and everywhere, and I'm thinking the dirt along a ditch in a flood is like compared
Yeah.
to the whole
Oh.
event.
Sure.
It seems rather minuscule, a high cost for a minuscule.
Right, and that's a great point, and that is a good question about cost.
Floods we're worried about, not the 100-year
It-
ones, right?
Yeah.
So we're not ever expected to export completely unless all of the ground is below floodplain. Is that a guideline I could?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So if you look outside, and if I was to look at your drainage district, you have areas where you can say, I can put it there.
As
Put
long as
it
it's
there.
Floodplain, we stay out of the bottom of the ditch generally.
Yeah.
But I am curious how it works because
Sure.
there's certainly areas that we would like to hire an engineering firm and talk about.
Sure.
To get them dredged. It's outside of our typical scope of
We
work.
don't
But
dredge.
Yeah, yeah.
We can.
but
You
there's
can-
many
yes, you can.
areas-
If
well,
you
with
have
enough
enough
money, you
engineering and
can.
Yeah.
permitting- yeah, with enough permitting, yes,
Well-
we could. And I think that's definitely in our future
Sure.
someday. But
Yeah, we
Um,
can. I think
there's
okay.
some very specific permitting I can't remember the acronyms for, but
Right. Well, and one of the things that we will say is that you are allowed, especially when in the drainage districts, you have a historical precedent that's in place. It's recorded. If
yeah,
you
we
are,
have
dr-
elevations that we
I was
can
going to say
prove were there.
exactly. If you
Go
are,
through
if
the-
you're,
on our maps where the
Yeah.
elevations are,
if
as
you
long
go,
as we can prove that they're supposed to be there, and we can say, look, here's our elevation. We're a foot higher than what it was designed.
exactly. If you're
but-
always going back to your historical design for your drainage district, and you're working within the confines of these very simple regulations, you can dredge.
And I think the permit, a lot of that is just to gain some supervision, see that we have our drawings, have something to inspect to, and a series of plans to protect for silt and so forth. Right?
Exactly. And one of the things that we do offer, and Renee will talk about, is what we would like to encourage what you've just described is, you know what it is? It's a conversation, right? What can we do to support you? You have some needs. We have some things we'd like to help you with as well. And there's costs associated with that. We have some dollars to help you with that. We want to make it, we want to
Well,
remove.
there's cost. There's a benefit to everybody.
There is.
With
Yep.
that cost, and we can use you guys for that.
I'm going to hand off to Miles.
Now, my next question
I'm sorry, yeah.
is-
Continue.
It's for you.
Sure.
Okay.
Anyway, and it's regards to, So I call and I say, hey, a bird dropped a fish in my ditch. What are you going to do?
What am I gonna do?
Yeah.
I'm gonna let it live its best life in that dish unless it's.
Well, it dries up, but I guess I'm curious. What
I
we're reporting something, and I'm looking for the point.
Sure. I mean, I guess it depends. There's situations where if a fish got somewhere and we were like, well, that's a high valued fish, so not a stickleback or something like that, which gets into these drainage ditches and then they dry up and they die. It's kind of just, that's part of the normal process, it seems like. But if it's like, say, like a chum or something gets into a ditch, can't get back out, you call us. We would either go out directly ourselves or have somebody, perhaps with the county or with the tribe, whoever is able to go out and net that fish and get them back to where they need to go.
Well, it's more of a study of where did that fish come from, or is it?
Well, that's kind of my concern. Is that,
But
now the
the-
government's going to come every year and
Yeah, that permit
search
that we were talking
and,
about will not longer be issued.
I just
I would say that that's not a general activity that the state goes out and does. Now, if we have a request from a concerned citizen saying, hey, we got all these fish in here that are going to die unless we go and rescue them, that's something we're going to be responsive to. And then there's certain rivers that maybe have sensitive species. There may be dam operations that rise and lower the water levels at certain times of the year where we know those fish are going to be in peril every year in this certain spot. Then maybe we'll come up with more of a well-tailored plan to get in there and go there every year and try to get all of the necessary approvals from any landowners or anything like that to go in there. But those are few and far between.
yeah, that's what I kind of figured, but I just always asking.
That's a good question.
Do you think you need?
Yeah. And part of that was also driven by the fact that the presence of fish is not just like the random thing. It could be that there's quote unquote, I say this carefully, fish in your system at times of the year. And the idea is that we could, and I think what Miles would also suggest that there's probably a place for them there. So fish are found there. It's not just was it a mistake, but what does it tell us about the system? So maybe that's the surprise. Like we didn't think there was fish there. And so there's a way that he would guide that conversation in terms of how do we finish the drainage, but then how do we take into account how we might just modify how we do maintenance moving forward.
And then, right, if we get that call, we're going to also want to think, okay, what time of the year is it?
Right.
What is this water course? It might just look like a very plain ag drainage ditch that isn't providing any habitat.
Sure.
But if it's the right time of year, maybe they do want to go into those little ditches for part of the year because the water quality is good, because the temperature is right. Sometimes fish will go into ag ditches because in the winter, specifically because the water temperature is warmer in there than it is in the main stem of whatever creek is nearby, which doesn't seem super intuitive, right? If you know a lot about salmonids, but that does happen. Yeah, and then they'll sense when the water level's going down, and then they'll get their ass. Sorry, they'll get their butts out of there. So yeah, and then to follow up on the dredge spoils conversation, and hopefully I'm not getting too far out of my lane, but at least in the waters of the state, when we're talking about what to do with dredge spoils, sometimes, obviously we don't like when sidecast material is just sidecast. It's just left there right next to the creek and it just turns into like a berm. But one of those options that seems to work a lot of times with landowners is taking that material and spreading it out, say like 6 inches in depth over a farm field or something like that. That way you're creating a new use for it and you're not having to spend as much extra energy getting that stuff off site.
That's what I was
Our
wondering what you
fields
could do with it.
are from the original dig to the dig that happened 30 years ago. They just spread them out alongside, and it's 100 feet wide alongside the ditch, and we grow grass on it.
There you go. Okay, so we're talking about HBAs, trying to keep it broad level. I'll try not to go on too many tangents here.
I got one question.
Go ahead.
What about the fish in the ponds that people stock in the ponds, and then they decide to leave during the winter? Because they
Well,
didn't have their pond.
that's if they're stocking it themselves and they have a way to get out, that's probably not legal and something that we probably didn't permit. We don't permit a whole lot of stocking of ponds outside of grass carp. If you go through the permitting process to get grass carp put into a pond for vegetation and insect maintenance, we will permit that. We do raise grass carp that are, I think, triploids that they're not able to reproduce. And we'll allow those in situations where we are confident that they won't be able to get out. So either it doesn't flood in a way that it connects now to waters of the state, or somewhere where you can put like a grate on the outlet. So we do still allow that, but yeah, I'm sure there are situations like that happen.
There's several ponds that I know of, they have trout in them. They stock them with trout.
I don't know nothing about that.
Okay.
Back to ag drainage.
Back to egg drainage.
Okay, yeah, so putting my regulator hat on, I guess, that is one of my duties. Is the state has a hydraulic project approval, so HPA permitting process, which is required prior to conducting any hydraulic work in what's waters of the state. What are waters of the state? Go ahead.
What is considered a hydraulic project?
Let's talk about some examples of that. So dredging, which we've already mentioned, is certainly hydraulic work. Bank stabilization, removing large woody material from a creek like a fallen tree, actually removing a standing tree that's next to a creek in many situations would require a permit prior to removing that tree. Because if it were to fall, it would create habitat. Yes.
So not drainage districts.
So you said creek, not ditch.
Right. Yeah, there's some nuance there. Beaver dam management, culvert bridge removal or replacement. Those are all solid examples of something that's going to require an HPA if it's work conducted in waters of the state. And it's also like, it's usually work that affects the bed or banks below ordinary high water line, so below the high water line, water mark of that water course. But not necessarily so. I don't want to get into the situations where that doesn't necessarily apply. So HPA permits. Okay, well, Dean kind of tried to get into the different channels, right? Like, so an ag ditch or a stormwater conveyance ditch that's just conveying runoff, or something that was never a surface water channel historically, very safely not regulated by us, not considered waters of the state. But then there's natural modified channels which may look exactly like an agricultural ditch and might function exactly like one. But if historically there was a channel there, if you look upstream and you get outside of the influence of that ag ditch condition and it is a creek, then that agricultural ditch section is considered a creek and it is waters of the state. I get that can get really tricky sometimes. Sometimes it's like obvious. Sometimes you're like, I have no idea. Because you can have like a little side ditch that's well connected to waters of the state and you go, what is that? I would say when in doubt, either give me or give Dean a call or an email, and that's our bailiwick. That's what we do is we help people make those determinations and then provide any sort of technical assistance beyond that. And that's why I brought a few of my cards if people are interested in getting my number, name, email. I did bring a few pamphlets for basically just the basics on what is an HPA and what does that process look like. If you do require a permit, again, something that if you're not experienced going through that, happy to help. Our permits cost $0.00. They do have a few different requirements that can make things tricky going through the process, like if SEPA is being required. I would say in the agricultural ditch world, if it's a regulated watercourse that you want to dredge, typically it's the SEPA process, which is the big hang-up. Now, Pierce County may have some exemptions in their code for certain ag ditches that are considered waters of the state. I don't want to get into that, but it is yet another reason. Get in touch with us. We can work through that with you. But yeah, our permitting process, it's an online permitting system. You just basically have to have your plans. What are you proposing to do, and where, and what kind of equipment are you using? Might require some basic plans. You know, all you guys, you're private landowners, you probably may or may not have experience in AutoCAD or coming up with engineering designs and things like that. And so we'd be realistic and work with you to come up with your plans and any sort of minimization measures, best management practices, things like that need to be put in place. And then another big part of that is when you can do the work. Typically that's the summer when the water's lower and there's less sensitive species around, and species that are either spawning or coming out of the gravel and are in their fry life stage. So talking about HPAs, we actually do specifically for if you're wanting to do aquatic vegetation maintenance of your ditch. We have what's called a pamphlet HPA. It's the Aquatic Plants and Fish Pamphlet. And that's available. You can pull it up online if you do a quick Google search. And it basically acts as your permit. And so depending on if you're doing like hand removal, mowing, a couple of other different types of removal, if you're following sort of the stock provisions, best management practices that we put in there, then that is your permit, and then you can do it. The most restrictive piece of that is it has work times built in there, and the work time for any work in the Puyallup River Basin is going to be July 15th through August 31st, which is pretty restrictive and conservative and not very prescriptive. So there is plenty of ag ditch vegetation maintenance work that could occur that could completely follow that. But if you're trying to do it outside of that window, it would require an individual HPA. It wouldn't make it necessarily more restrictive. Very likely it would make it actually, I could give you an individual permit that I could say, well, you could do this work January or June 15th through October 15th instead of July 15th through August 31st. So if that's, it would give you some flexibility. So if that's something that would be interesting for people, like I could definitely help you get an individual permit for something like that. Is there anything else that you wanted me to cover right now?
I got a question on the pamphlet HPA.
Sure.
You say that's our permit to clean the vegetation out of the ditch. So do we have to have that on person, on site when we're cleaning the ditch?
Technically, yes. It says in the pamphlet that you must have it on your person.
That's what I said. I know it does. That's why I was asking. Because we give one to our contractor then, and he's actually in the ditch cleaning, and then we carry one also when we're supervising.
It's good to keep one on hand nearby in case you need to refer back to it. That
You can have it on your phone.
I as long as you're familiar with it and you're not just going willy-nilly, I would say that's acceptable. And certainly, I mean, we're not going to have one of our compliance people hiding in every bush trying to say gotcha when you start work and you don't have it. So, but that, yes, that is.
I get a lot of concerned citizens in our course of work.
Right.
So, you know, having some sort of document might be really nice.
Everything that we've ran into in the last 3 years, everybody's going, wow, you guys are doing a great job. Keep it up. You know, there's not too many complaints about what we do. So.
Miles, when we talk, maybe just quickly before we pivot over to PCD, you and I had a conversation about beavers. I know that's a loaded word, But is there just a couple of things that might come to mind in terms of us recognize obviously they're here, how we can be working with them and still get our land to drain?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to talk about with beavers, but yes, I mean, beavers are in the basin. They're not going away at this point. Sort of how the state regulates beavers is, you know, we're not going back to the days of trapping and removing all of them. So it becomes a conversation of living with beavers. How do we manage them in a way that you know, we can live with it and the beavers can coexist on the landscape. And so there's a number of different things, right? There's some of those things would require an HPA, beaver dam management. So if you got a dam that's occurring on waters of the state, we do require a permit for things like notching or complete dam removal, installation of like a beaver deceiver sort of structure or a pond leveler. Those would be something you'd want to have a conversation with me prior to taking any of those actions. Really, if you got beavers and you're like, I don't know what the heck to do about this, or maybe I have some ideas, but I want to get a second opinion. Again, you call me and we'll get a site visit going. I'll come out and we'll diagnose the thing together and see what we want to try. Every beaver's different. They all got different personalities. Some of them are lazy and like staying in one spot, and some of them seem to like to want to give you headaches. And so that's where it becomes a very like prescriptive thing, and technical assistance can come in handy. There are also beaver relocation resources out there. One I'm thinking of is South Sound Beaver Recovery, fairly new operation. But that's an option if you've tried some things, it hasn't worked. You also don't want to kill those beavers, but you also feel like you can't live with them on your landscape. Trapping requires a permit. Our department gives those out, but they don't give them out to many people. Mostly licensed trappers who do this professionally. There are certain scenarios if you got nuisance wildlife that are threatening structures or human safety. I'm not sure exactly what that means other than Giardia and tularemia come to mind. If you have a situation like that, then potentially you could trap without needing to have a permit. There's a nonprofit out there too called Beavers Northwest, who's really good about coming out and giving free consultations. If for some reason you don't like me and don't want to have me come out and help you, Beavers Northwest does a really good job coming out, and they're sort of the beaver professionals in South Puget Sound. So I can't recommend them highly enough. And I think that's all I got on beavers for now.
Cool. Miles, thank you. I think we're ready to pivot to.
I have a quick question.
yeah.
It has, I think, Portia Lee.
Yeah, Portia Lee.
Is like our district. Did you have her cards or just use this number here? Or
I just brought mine today.
Miles, I did include hers on the sheet.
Oh, that's
When
awesome.
I talked,
So that, okay.
yeah, that should be current. It's based on what you gave me for all
Yeah.
three of you guys.
Yep. So
Portia's been around for a while, hasn't
she used to cover Graves Harbor County. She's been in Pierce County now for I think a little over 2 years, but she covers anything that drains into the Nisqually and then the Upper Clover and Gig Harbor area. Any other questions?
Thank you, sir.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit briefly about what our intent is with this workshop and then going forward. So we three and many other county folks, different departments, planning and land services, and the tribes and several other interested groups are part of, this is what is called a floodplains for the future area. So if you haven't heard of this, it's funding coming from the EPA to Department of Ecology and then to organizations. There's several of them throughout Washington State, and one of them is focused on the Puyallup watershed, specifically, especially down here. So if you notice, there's a bunch of driveways and there's cool tulip trees and then no houses. So this area was very marginal farming and very marginal residential land. So Floodplains for the Future is all about farms, fish, and flood, and how to balance those three things so they're all benefiting. So our portion is, and Dean, is more for the helping the farmers, right? So you all passed Zestful Gardens over here, and they've historically had some, drainage issues, as well as many of the other farmers down here. So the idea down in this area is to create areas where natural water is, and that sponge effect of the wetlands, and to improve the natural, or not natural, the man-made drainage systems to benefit agriculture, and then doing both of these things in such a way that it's going to benefit the fish. So Pierce County has bought out all these houses, demolished them, and our team, we've been working on, we've got 90% designs done to basically, you don't know it, but there's there's a drainage ditch over here and then some drainage ditches here, and they're going through little driveway culverts and slowing down and getting blocked as they go. So we have a subcontract with Pierce County, we as in the Conservation District, to manage one of the ag drainage improvement projects. And what we're going to do is we're going to go 20 feet in here and instead of having all these culverts taken out, because if you notice, we've got the power lines here, they don't want us messing around in this area at all. They don't want us to undermine their power poles. So we're going to create a new drainage ditch, ag drainage ditch, 20 feet over here. And hopefully this project's going to be happening this summer. So it will be benefiting all the farmers down here that currently, all the water backs up and they can't get on their fields until May or later. So that's part of what this project's about. And then Allie's going to tell you about, oh, and I forgot to mention, so Dean had the little carrot in there of, we'll pay for your assessment, your customer information meetings. We've got some funding through the Floodplains by Design program to do a couple of pilot projects. We can help you with this $500, if you want to come in and have a chit chat about what you're thinking of doing. If you're in the Puyallup watershed, right? Yeah, sorry, Puyallup, sorry. But, and if you are interested in doing this skinny buffer type scenario, which we're going to talk about, we can also offer cost sharing on the plants and the planting and the maintenance and all that jazz. And we may be able to help you with some of the design engineering that Miles was talking about, like show us your historical depth. We'll get our engineer to say, okay, well then you need to cut down X feet here, inches here, and that sort of thing. So we have a little bit of funding to do a couple of test projects in this area, and as a participant, you guys are first in line if you're in the Puyallup to take part in this program if you're interested. Okay, so you guys ready to hear about what's happening, or should we walk down there or do a little talk and then walk?
I don't know, maybe
Everyone's
nice to talk
tired
about it
of
once we get there.
standing.
Yeah, let's go down.
Okay, let's walk down.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can shut that.
Right. Yeah, so as we started getting involved with this integrated management group that Renee talked about, all trying to balance the fish and the flood and the farm initiatives, we became aware of the work that the Whatcom CD had been doing around their extensive system of ag drainage ditches, which was to put these, what they were calling skinny buffers, along these ditches, and kind of taking the approach of planting things really tight so that they would fill out quickly and reduce the need for years of management, and that they would also be species that you could come in, like if you had to get into the ditch, you weren't blocked out, you could get in there, species that you could just mow down, see what's going on, and get in there to do maintenance that you might need to do. But they were really high on them because they were seeing that, yeah, they're a little bit of an upfront cost to get them established, but really not, the maintenance on them for the first several years is not really much more expensive than the regular mowing and other herbicide maintenance that you would do on a ditch. So, and that the idea is that once they get established, they basically eliminate the need for maintenance. So it seemed like a real win, and not only for the maintenance aspect, but then also adding pollinator and wildlife habitat on farms, which has benefits for the wider ecosystem and the farms themselves. So in Whatcom, they kind of zeroed in on twinberry, ninebark, and red osier dogwood as the best species to use, just because they're really fast growing. They're like multi-stemmed, so if they get mowed down, they just pop back up, and they take a little bit of abuse from beavers as well. They used willows when they were first starting out up there, and decided that actually was not ideal because they actually clogged things up. So they were really effective in growing quickly, but they clogged things up. So when we started getting involved with this initiative in Clear Creek, we said, well, can we maybe put one of these skinny buffers on a stretch of ditch, see if they work down here for us, see if farmers like them. So this stretch is, it's 1,000 feet. It's the north-south running portion of Nancy's Ditch. And so what we did was, it's just pretty much straight reed canary grass. That was the main invasive. And these buffers are 8 foot on either side, and they're spaced on 3-foot centers. And we put these in the spring of 2023. It was early April of 2023. So you can kind of see they're filling in pretty quick. We're hoping this is the last year that we are going to have to do maintenance on them. And these were bare root plantings. Yeah.
So 16 inches or less.
Yeah, they were kind of like, they were big long sticks, and we actually hired Sound Native Plants. They're a habitat restoration outfit now they're based in Portland, but they work up here. And I gave you the breakdown of sort of the cost to get this all established. It does look a little bit hefty, but when we compared it to the work that DD10, that we were also helping DD10 with just to mow, it really actually is just several $1,000s a year less, and they have to do it every year, every 2 years. So the hope is that this sort of thing would fill in, and then it kind of just takes care of itself. So that's the Nancy's Ditch skinny buffers. And yeah.
I just wanted to add a comment about twinberry and ninebark, sort of a dual benefit of those ones, and then also like osoberry and elderberry. Sitka spruce is they're less desirable as beaver food.
Okay.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
if you're trying to establish this, and you're putting in the time and the effort and the money to do that.
Yeah.
That's also an added benefit potentially, is you're not just creating a beaver buffet.
Yeah.
Expected maximum, right? These trees typically grow to.
It's 15 feet, maybe?
I would
Something like that.
refer to you on that.
You could kind of see, we included a picture of a before and after from a ditch up in Whatcom. I mean, it's hard to see the scale, but you can kind of see where it's this open field, and then it just kind of covers it. And so if you do have fish in the ditch, it's good habitat, but
For us,
yeah.
for maintenance, when we want to maintain the actual ditch bank, we want to kind of see what's going on.
Yeah.
We like to leave enough space at the top. Maybe it's not necessary here. Maybe the shade slows some of that growth down, but we like to leave enough flat on the top where we can rake out vegetation
Yeah.
that we cut onto the top to lay there.
Yeah.
Have somewhere to go with it. Where you can see it's planted pretty close, so I don't know
Mm-hmm.
the a practical aspect of me and my rubber boots cutting into the ditch.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you do there?
Yeah.
Or what is the plan, or is it just get all mulched down into the bank? Or
Yeah. Like you're talking about getting like pulling sediment out, or just
we go through our ditches.
Yeah.
That the grass that we have grows 4 feet tall, and then it lays
Oh,
down in
right.
the grass.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it flows down into the culverts and the pumps.
Yeah.
And so we cut and rake onto the bank
yeah,
in the summertime.
right.
So I didn't know if there was any expectation of maintenance on these banks ever, or if they are just left to the wild. Or
Well, in Whatcom, what they found is that it covers it so completely that the grass.
yeah, the grass isn't the issue.
Right.
It kind of creates a tunnel over the
Yeah.
over the stream.
Right.
Okay.
But
That's
You
the
know,
expectation. For
yeah.
future maintenance. Okay. Gotcha. It keeps
Mhm.
it up. Got it.
But the CD up at Whatcom has sent us pictures of when they've had to get in to do some sort of maintenance. They really just come in and they just mow it all down.
Section and then it goes.
Yeah, and then it just bounces back.
Gotcha.
So, which is part of the reason why they chose the species they did. But yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So on this site, so it's planted in the spring of 2023, and then there was brush cutting and herbicide that year, and in 2024, and then it was just brush cut a couple weeks ago, and they're going to come in and do an herbicide treatment, do that spring, summer, and fall this year. So we're hoping that next year.
Is the herbicide
Yeah.
targeted towards certain species, or is it just what is the?
Here, mainly the reed canary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and so there's one that does just target that.
Yeah, I can't remember the name. Yeah,
Yeah, I'd be curious
I can't remember the name of the herb. We could get it. Yeah, yeah,
how that plant works out.
yeah.
So, quick question. So I'm just trying to get my head around this. So essentially, seems like the flooding in this area comes from that side, basically this side of this direction, or from
Kinda.
from multiple, or
It all raises equally.
This is
okay.
yeah. This is a bathtub here.
That's the lowest point. That
Yeah.
Okay, so but as it recedes, this helps channel the water out off faster.
Yeah.
It retards its movement, so it doesn't do as much damage.
I see what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean?
where you're at.
It retards, and then as it sinks down and then drains off, it channels
Yeah.
out faster. So it's I mean that's like
Yeah, no.
things
Where
tend to
is
drain
there an
faster.
outfall? I mean, it all ends up in the sound someday.
Right.
Yeah, this dog legs into Clear Creek.
Okay.
Yeah,
And that runs over by the reservation and across.
yeah, along the train tracks and into Puyallup. Yeah. Swan Creek runs into Clear Creek. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
in our district, we've basically got like a 16-foot easement, and in places our ditch is already close to 16 feet wide.
Yeah.
So how do we go about doing this? We've got pretty well ditch downstream. So I mean, I've only been doing it for about 5 years now. So, but
Yeah.
I mean, do we contact the landowner and get permission to do this kind of stuff, and try to explain to them benefit, or?
Yeah, I mean, we could fund a project that has multiple landowners involved. Yeah, is that your question? Like,
Well, I'm just
Or-
trying to figure out. I mean, since we don't have
yeah.
the space, because you said 8 feet on either side.
Oh, I see.
We
You're
don't have that.
right.
There's places where our ditch is already 12, 14, 15 feet
Yeah.
wide, and that's our total easement.
Yeah.
So other than that, then we're on to the property owners.
Right.
Well, that's where these guys persuade them.
Yes.
That's my question. How do we go about talking to those guys? Do we
Yeah.
come to you and say, hey, look, we've got a spot where we think that this might work.
Mhm.
Can you help us persuade these people to maybe do that?
Yeah.
And Dave, that was a little bit like what we were trying to do with Paul, right? So
Yes.
when we were dealing with that issue, we were
And,
trying to set
and
up
that
a couple.
was all good right up until all of a sudden Paul just said,
He got
I don't
cold
want
feet.
you on
Yeah,
that.
we literally were
Yeah.
going to do this
I
on
mean,
Upper
the
Swan Creek.
county
Mhm.
even
We had money.
pledged $500 towards the project.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
blah, 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 but I
Yeah.
don't know what happened, but the landowner says,
Yep.
Okay.
That's part of why we're doing this demo site to like, come
Mhm.
look,
Yeah.
see what it looks like. Because, you know, Whatcom is not just a few minutes away. So
Yeah.
this is going to be our forever like demo site. We're hoping to, you know, start
Yeah.
replicating this.
So yeah, and in 10 years it should look really good. It'll
Yeah.
look like
Oh, I
that.
mean, look-
It'll look like that over there where it's all.
Mhm.
Oh, it'll be quicker than 10 years.
Mhm.
You know, these are fast-growing plants.
Yeah.
So, David, I mean, they're really saying this is the last year they'll do management on this. I mean, these red osier dogwood are already probably 2/3 of their natural height. I mean, they'll go up a little bit more, and they'll just continue to fill this in. So, you know, maybe with good, I think what you're saying,
Yeah.
they'll have grown up and they no longer wearing diapers, and they're
Yeah.
just doing the good thing, which is they're covering the soil, controlling the
Yeah.
green canary grass, and they're providing other, besides the habitat, they also help manage and provide some protection of water quality.
Mhm.
Yeah, because they're retaining the soil in a place here, so it's not ending up in your ditch.
Well, and not only
So
that,
then
but
you're
they're
not
drinking water too. So
Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
They're not going to get runners like blackberries.
Right.
that's a good.
Well, that's why they said don't do willows because it just you
Somebody
know
put willows in our ditch years ago.
yeah
And not, they're gone. But
right yeah
It was
yeah exactly
like,
yeah
they'll soak up the water.
Yeah.
They didn't know it was happening back then. But anyway.
well and then you know in Whatcom these are private lands and so they wanted a solution that would work and not gobble up valuable farmland.
This is all private.
Yeah, and so or and become invasive.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, we'll see. Sorry.
Are we done?
That's all I
Might be
have.
worth
Yeah.
mentioning that
Yeah.
this sort of voluntary planting does not require any permitting from anybody. In
Oh,
case
yeah.
people don't know that.
Yeah. Okay. That is a good point. So Miles makes the point. Yeah. There you go. Miles would like to point out that this sort of project requires no permits. So, volunteer. Yeah.
Permits. I don't want anybody to think like, oh, I don't want to go through these hoops or anything like that. This is all good stuff.
Where do we
Yeah.
find a document or a study on this project? Is it found anywhere easily? So if I can remember those species and things.
Yeah. We can send you more stuff from Whatcom, and then also WSU did a whole study. They on these skinny buffers up in Whatcom. They were focused more on is it preventing pesticide drift and water quality issues and temperature. So which they found it was very effective.
Yeah,
So.
I would do a bunch of
Pardon?
space. Which extension center did that? The WSU is it?
Yeah. No. I think it was kind of a conglomerate of the Mount Vernon site up there and yeah. But we can get you that info. Yeah.
And doesn't King County has a very similar program in place for skinny buffers as well? Not just
They've done a really extensive study on buffers. Yeah.
Their ADAP
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have. Yeah. Hey, Jason, how about this? What I did is I was just going to actually finish with that, and I'm not saying we're done, but in your packet there is a sheet that has a QR code on it.
Okay.
What that does, if you're interested, is it takes you to all these materials at the Pierce County Farm and Ag site. And what I can do is, and Allie and I had this conversation, well, how much do we want to share about skinny buffers and all the details? And what I think you are hearing from you guys is you want more details. And so I've got access to the study. I can load it.
Perfect.
So you don't have, we don't have to, it will make it available to everybody.
Yeah.
Part of it was species. I was
Oh,
interested
sure.
in species because
Yeah.
I'm probably going to get asked some of those questions.
Oh,
and I
totally.
wanted to share with our
Yeah.
other commissioner.
Sure.
And when we're out there working, part of the job is clearing the ditches, and part of it is conservation. And
Yeah,
so
there
I'd
you
like
go.
to be able to convey all this to the rest of our crew.
Right.
Yeah.
There's 6 other guys. And
Yeah.
help them understand they're not just knocking grass down.
There you go.
You know, and
right.
this is a little
Sure.
bigger. So.
Yeah.
What Whatcom does a really good job, Jason, did a really good job on, Jason, is that they actually gave suites of plants to use for specific purposes.
Nice.
And it says, I've got this type of land, I want to do this, and you can
Yeah.
look at the list and go, oh, there it is.
And
You don't have to
we're
make
always,
it up.
We're always looking for projects. We
Yeah.
work with
Yeah.
the Scouts and a couple of others.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so we could do some bare root, we
Yeah.
can do some plantings, or we can. I have a big space that we're going to start trying to get some starts going that are available to
Yeah.
people. So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Jason, a lot of these you don't even have to have bare root. You can take cuttings.
You can actually take cuttings, right?
Like this red osier dogwood, you can cut this guy right here,
Yep.
stick it
Shove it
halfway in
in the
the ground,
Bingo.
Yeah, we've done some blackberry abatement, and I'm just not that good with the species.
Yeah.
I mean, they cover
Yeah.
this one particular part of our dam.
Yeah, exactly. Like blackberry.
The good part is it's grown up enough that that's great.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Then they hang down in the ditch.
24. Yeah, that's Jason Pearson. Pearson.
Okay, is that
Mhm.
spoke to him or not? And then 10 is.
Well, 10's not here because they this is their wheelhouse. But Dave Peters and Tom are District 14. They're up in Upper Swan Creek. Yeah, and I yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Take care.